Humanity didn't fake its extinction. We achieved it.
The celebration across the Galactic Assembly had lasted 17 standard cycles, and still, the champagne flowed. On the crystalline balconies of the Velthari homeworld, diplomats from 100 civilizations raised their glasses to the sky, toasting to the most monumental event in recorded history. Humanity was dead. The last transmission from Saul had come 3 months ago, a garbled, desperate message that cut off mid-sentence. The human colonies had gone silent one by one, like stars winking out in a slow cascade across the Orion Arm. The Velthari scientists had confirmed it. The biological signature that had permeated human space for centuries had faded to nothing. "I never thought I'd see this day," whispered Ambassador Crix, his cerulean skin flushing with pleasure as he watched the holographic displays showing the darkening human systems. 200 years of their chaos, their noise, their impossible demands, and now finally silence. His companion, a tall Tessara named Viles, nodded slowly, her silver eyes reflecting the fireworks painting the night sky above them. They were an anomaly. The assembly will be more stable without them. Stable, Crix agreed, savoring the word. Predictable, civilized. Neither of them noticed when the first light in the distant human sector flickered and died. 73 light-years away, in what had once been the heart of human space, something ancient stirred. The Obsidian Gate, humanity's greatest achievement and most closely guarded secret, pulsed with energy that hadn't been seen in millennia. It had been built before humans ever ventured beyond their own solar system, constructed from materials no other species could identify, powered by forces that defied understanding. And now, finally, it was Awakenings. In the darkness of the abandoned Cygnus station, a single light blinked on, then another, then 1,000 more cascading through the derelict structure like a wave of stars being born. Deep within the station's core, a holographic interface flickered to life, displaying words in a language that hadn't been spoken aloud in centuries. Initiating Protocol 7. The voice that spoke wasn't human. It was something else, something that had been waiting, patient, and silent for exactly this moment. On the Velthari homeworld, the celebration continued, oblivious to the changes rippling through the galaxy. It wasn't until the third cycle that anyone noticed something was wrong. "The Corvan relay," muttered Technician Fen, staring at his console in confusion. It's not responding." His supervisor, a harried Velthari named Thrix, pushed past him. "What do you mean it's not responding? Have you tried the secondary channels?" "Everything's dark, not just the relay, the whole Corvan network." Fen's fingers trembled as they danced across the console. It's like someone just turned it off. Thrix felt a cold tendril of fear wrap around his heart. The Corvan relays were ancient, far older than any species in the assembly. They had been there when the first Velthari ships had ventured into space, humming with quiet power, connecting system to system in a web of instantaneous communication that no one fully understood. No one had ever been able to turn them off before. "Send a message to the assembly," Thrix ordered. "Priority 1, tell them." The lights in the communications center flickered once, then died. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated itself. On the Tessara worlds, the ancient waypoints that guided their ships through hyperspace began to malfunction. In the Graxan systems, the planetary shields that had protected their worlds for generations flickered and failed. The Velari's agricultural networks, which had ended famine on 100 worlds, shut down without warning. Each of these technologies had one thing in common: they had all been discovered, not invented. Found buried in dead systems, drifting in asteroid fields, hidden on moons that no species had bothered to explore until they needed them. Technologies that no one could replicate, no one could improve upon, and no one could turn off. Until now. What in the name of the first ancestors is happening? demanded Assembly Chancellor Morix, slamming his fist against the council table. Around him, representatives from a dozen species argued and shouted, their panic palpable. "The human systems are lighting up," reported a breathless aide. "All of them. Every station, every colony, every outpost that we confirmed was dead, they're coming back online." "That's impossible," hissed the Graxan ambassador. "We verified the biological extinctions ourselves. There are no humans left." "Then who is activating their systems?" Morix demanded. "Their defense networks are coming online. Their shipyards are powering up. We're detecting energy signatures we've never seen before." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "The Obsidian Gate," whispered an ANC. Enti Tessara Elder, her silver eyes wide with something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. "It has to be. Only the gate could." "What gate?" Morix snapped. "What are you talking about?" But the elder had gone pale, her centuries of composure shattered by something the others couldn't see. In the depths of what had been human space, the changes accelerated. The derelict stations that explorers had picked over for salvage began to reconstruct themselves, metal flowing like water, forming new structures that defied conventional engineering. Ships that had been dead in space for decades ignited their drives, moving with purpose toward coordinates that existed on no known star chart. And at the center of it all, the Obsidian Gate blazed with light that was visible across dozens of systems. It was Ambassador Crix who finally voiced what everyone was thinking. "This is humanity's doing. Somehow, some way they planned this. They faked their own extinction." "That's absurd," Viles replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "How could an entire species fake its own death? We saw the biological signatures fade. We confirmed." "Confirmed what they wanted us to confirm," Crix interrupted. "Think about it. In 200 years of dealing with humans, when have they ever been what they appeared to be? When have they ever played by our rules?" Viles wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because Crix was right, humans had never made sense. They had arrived in the galactic community as a barely spacefaring species, yet within decades they possessed technologies that rivaled the most advanced civilizations. They had expanded at a rate that should have been impossible, colonizing worlds that should have been beyond their reach. And they had always been preparing for something. The first probe reached the edge of human space on the 5th cycle after the lights began turning on. It was a Tessara construct, designed for speed and stealth, equipped with sensors that could detect a single organism on a planet's surface from orbit. What it found there made no sense. The human colonies were still empty. No biological signatures, no life signs, no evidence that anyone had been there for months. But the infrastructure was alive, automated systems functioning at levels that shouldn't have been possible, ships moving in perfect formation, defensive networks operating with terrifying efficiency. And in the center of each colony, carved into the ground with mathematical precision, was a symbol that the probe's databases couldn't identify. But the Tessara Elder could. "It's old," she whispered when the assembly showed her the images. "Older than the Tessara, older than the Velthari, older than any species that still exists." Her hands trembled as she traced the symbol on the screen. "We found markings like this once in the ruins of a dead world. We thought they were decorative, we thought." "What?" Morix demanded. "What did you think?" "I think," the elder said slowly, "that we were wrong about humans. I think we were wrong about everything." The second probe didn't return. Neither did the third. The fourth came back damaged, its data cores corrupted, but it managed to transmit one fragmentary image before it died. A ship unlike anything in the Assembly's databases, moving with impossible grace through the void. It wasn't humans, but it was flying under a human flag. "We need to make contact," declared the Corvan representative, a species known for their diplomatic expertise. Whatever is happening in human space, we can't simply. The last 4 ships we sent didn't come back, Morix interrupted. We're not sending more until we understand what we're dealing with. With respect, Chancellor, we don't have time for understanding. Our systems are failing. Our technologies are shutting down. Whatever humans did before they died, they're undoing it now. If we don't find out why. The main display screen flickered, cutting him off. When it stabilized, it showed a face that none of them had ever seen before, but that all of them recognized from historical records. Human, male, middle-aged, with the weathered features of someone who had spent too long among the stars. His eyes were a deep brown that seemed to hold depths that no organic being should possess. Chancellor Morix, the man said, his voice calm and measured, I apologize for the disruption. We've had to take some precautions. Who are you? Morix demanded, though he already knew the answer. My name is Captain James Henderson. I've been dead for approximately 3 months according to your records. A faint smile crossed the man's face. Obviously, those records are incorrect. The assembly chamber erupted into chaos. Henderson watched silently, his expression unreadable, as species that had prided themselves on decorum for millennia devolved into shouting and panic. I think, Henderson said finally, his voice cutting through the noise with surprising authority, that we have a great deal to discuss. But first, I need you to understand something. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. Humanity didn't fake its extinction. We achieved it. Every human being, every colony, every outpost, we removed ourselves from this galaxy completely. Biological signatures, technological traces, even the quantum entanglements that you use to track us all gone. He leaned forward slightly. Do you have any idea how difficult that is? How much preparation it required? Then how are you speaking to us now? Viles asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Henderson's smile returned, but this time it held something that looked almost like sadness. Because I'm not speaking to you from this galaxy, I'm speaking to you from somewhere else entirely. And the things that are happening in what you call human space, the systems coming online, the ships moving, the technologies activating, they're not human. The silence that followed was absolute. They're automated responses, Henderson continued, triggered by our absence. We built them centuries ago before we even joined the assembly. We didn't know what they were for at the time, we just knew we had to build them. His eyes seemed to focus on something far away. It turns out we were preparing for exactly this moment. For what moment? Morix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become heavier, as if the words themselves carried weight. Do you know why humans were different? He asked. Why we advanced so quickly, why we had technologies that made no sense for a species as young as ours. Because you're aggressive, the Graxan ambassador snarled. Because you conquered and stole and… Because we remembered, Henderson interrupted gently. Every human child is born with fragments of memories that don't belong to them. Images of vast cities among the stars, sounds of languages that no one speaks anymore, knowledge of technologies that we shouldn't possess. He paused. For centuries, we thought it was just a quirk of our biology, some kind of genetic memory like what you see in other species, but it wasn't. What was it? Viles asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want the answer. It was a message, Henderson said, a message we left for ourselves a long time ago, a warning. He took a breath. Humanity isn't young, Chancellor, we're ancient, older than the gate, older than the symbols you found on that dead world, older than this galaxy itself. The assembly had gone still. Even the air seemed to have stopped moving. That's impossible, Morix said finally. The oldest species in the galaxy. Our children, Henderson finished, compared to what we were, what we are again now. He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time he looked tired, truly deeply tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Millions of years ago, there was a civilization that spanned multiple galaxies. They had technologies you couldn't imagine, manipulation of fundamental forces, control over life and death itself. They were gods by any reasonable definition. His voice dropped. And they discovered something terrible, something that was coming for them, something that couldn't be stopped, couldn't be fought, couldn't be reasoned with. The Devourer, the Tessara elder whispered, and this time her voice held something beyond fear. It held recognition. The myth, the end of all things. Not a myth, Henderson said quietly. A memory, one that we made sure would survive even if we didn't. What are you saying? Morix demanded. That humanity is some ancient civilization that destroyed itself, that you've been playing some game with us for 200 years. No game, Henderson replied, and there was something in his voice that made Morix feel suddenly, irrationally ashamed. No deception. When we first encountered the assembly, we were exactly what we appeared to be, a young species just beginning to explore the stars. We didn't remember what we had been. The memories were too fragmented, too buried. It wasn't until we'd been among you for decades that we started putting the pieces together. And when you did, Viles asked. We started preparing, Henderson said simply. Every strange technology you thought we'd stolen or developed too quickly, we were remembering it, reconstructing it from fragments buried in our own minds. The gate, the automated systems, the protocols we activated when we died, they weren't human inventions. They were echoes, shadows of what we used to be. Why? The question came from a representative who hadn't spoken before, a small, quiet species that rarely involved itself in assembly politics. Why not tell us? Why pretend to die? And our son's expression shifted, becoming something infinitely sad. Because telling you wouldn't have helped, would have just added your panic to ours. He paused. And because we had to test something first. Test what? Morix asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Whether you were worth saving. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Around the assembly chamber, species that had considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization went very still. We've watched you for 200 years, Henderson continued. Watched you fight among yourselves, make alliances, break them, struggle with the same problems we struggled with millions of years ago. And we wondered, when the Devourer comes, when the darkness that destroyed us before returns, will you be any different? Will you be better than we were? Or will you just be another meal? The Tessara elder said quietly, her ancient eyes meeting Henderson's on the screen. Oh yes, Henderson said, exactly. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Finally, it was Viles who broke it. What did you decide? She asked. Are we worth saving? Henderson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more human than it had been since the conversation began. We decided that we don't have the right to make that choice for you, he said. We can prepare you. We can give you the tools our ancestors developed, the technologies that might give you a chance. But in the end, whether you survive or not, that's going to depend on you. The things that are activating in human space, Crick said slowly. The systems coming online, that's the preparation you're talking about. Part of it, Henderson nodded. Automated defenses, early warning systems, technologies that took us millions of years to develop the first time. But the most important preparation isn't technological. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. It's the knowledge that you're not alone, that someone has faced this before, that someone survived it at least long enough to pass on what they learned. His eyes seemed to focus on something far away. The Devourer isn't just coming for you, it's coming for everything, every galaxy, every species, every trace of life in the universe. And the only thing that's ever slowed it down, the only thing that's ever made it pause, is unity. Species working together, combining their strengths, their knowledge, their willingness to sacrifice. You're asking us to unite, Morix said flatly. After 200 years of competition, of conflict, of... I'm not asking you for anything, Henderson interrupted. I'm telling you what's coming. What you do with that information is up to you." He paused. "But I should mention one more thing. The technologies we're activating, they're not just defensive, they're connective. They'll link your systems together in ways you can't currently imagine. You'll be able to communicate instantaneously across the galaxy, share resources, information, personnel. The barriers that have kept you divided, the distances, the language differences, the centuries of mistrust, they'll become surmountable." "At a cost," the Tessara elder said. "It wasn't a question." "At a cost," Henderson agreed. "Because to accept these technologies, you'll have to accept that everything you thought you knew about yourselves is wrong, that your civilizations aren't as advanced as you believed, that your greatest achievements were hand-me-downs from species that came before you." He paused. "And you'll have to accept that humans, those chaotic, impossible, infuriating beings you celebrated destroying, are the only reason you have a chance at all." The assembly chamber was silent for a long time after Henderson's transmission ended. Around the table, representatives from 100 species sat with their own thoughts, their own fears, their own realizations. It was the quiet representative, the one from the small, unassuming species, who spoke first. "My people have a saying," she said, her voice barely audible. "When the forest burns, the trees that survive are the ones whose roots have grown together underground." She looked around the table. "Perhaps it's time we started growing our roots." "Easy to say," the Graxan ambassador snarled. "Your species has no pride to lose, no achievements to admit were borrowed." "My species has survived for 70,000 years by knowing when to be humble," she replied calmly. "Perhaps yours could learn something from that." The Graxan started to respond, but Viles interrupted. "She's right," Viles said, and her voice carried a weight that surprised even her. "We've been so focused on our own importance, our own achievements, that we've forgotten the most basic truth of existence." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "None of us got here alone. Every technology every advancement we've made was built on something that came before. Why should this be any different?" The debate continued for hours, but the tone had changed. The shouting had given way to something quieter, more thoughtful. The panic had faded, replaced by a grim determination that even the most skeptical representatives couldn't entirely dismiss. In the end, it was the Tessara elder who cast the deciding vote. "We found those symbols on a dead world," she said, her ancient voice carrying across the chamber. "A world that had been destroyed by something we couldn't identify. We assumed it was a natural disaster, a solar flare perhaps, a gravitational anomaly." She shook her head slowly. "But it wasn't, was it? It was the Devourer. It came for that civilization and they weren't ready. They didn't have anyone to warn them." She looked at the frozen image of Henderson on the display screen. "Humans could have stayed hidden, they could have saved themselves and left us to our fate, but they didn't." Her silver eyes swept across the assembly. "They came back, they warned us, they offered us the tools we need to survive." She paused. "If we refuse, if we let our pride doom us, then we deserve whatever comes." The vote was nearly unanimous. The changes began immediately. As the Assembly formally accepted humanity's offer, the technologies in what had been human space began to spread, flowing outward like a wave of light through the galaxy. Communication systems that had been separate for millennia suddenly linked, allowing instant contact between species that had never directly spoken before. Transportation networks activated, creating pathways that cut travel times from years to hours. Medical technologies that had been beyond imagination suddenly became available, promising to end diseases that had plagued species for generations. But the most profound change was the one no one had expected. As the new systems came online, as species began to communicate and cooperate in ways they never had before, something else awakened. Memories, fragmentary, confusing, but unmistakable, began to surface in the minds of individuals across the galaxy. A Velthari engineer suddenly understood how to manipulate gravitational fields in ways her species had never discovered. A Graxan scientist found himself writing equations that shouldn't have been possible, that described technologies his people had never developed. A young Tessara child started speaking in a language that had been dead for millions of years. It's the same thing that happened to us, Henderson explained when the assembly contacted him again. The memories aren't just human, they're universal, buried in the genetic code of every species that evolved in this galaxy, remnants of what came before. You knew this would happen, Viles said. It wasn't a question. We hoped, Henderson replied. The Devourer doesn't just destroy life, it consumes knowledge, erases it from the universe entirely. But some things are too fundamental to erase entirely. They get encoded in the most basic structures of existence, and when the right conditions are present, he trailed off. You're remembering what you used to be, what all of us used to be before the Devourer came the first time. The realization spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Every species began to understand that they weren't separate, weren't different, weren't the isolated civilizations they had believed themselves to be. They were fragments, broken pieces of something that had once been whole, something magnificent and terrible and beautiful beyond imagination. And with that understanding came something else: purpose. For the first time in galactic history, species stopped competing and started cooperating. Not because they were forced to, but because they finally understood that they were all part of the same story, the same struggle, the same desperate attempt to survive against an enemy that had already destroyed everything once before. The assembly transformed, becoming something new, something that had no precedent in recorded history. Decisions were made collectively, resources were shared freely, and the old animosities that had seemed so important just weeks before began to fade into irrelevance. It's not perfect, Viles admitted to Crix one evening as they watched ships from a dozen species moving in formation through the newly activated transport network. There are still disagreements, still conflicts, still species that don't trust each other. But it's different, Crix agreed. It's better than it was. Because we finally understand what's at stake, Viles said. Because we finally know that we're not competing with each other. We're competing with extinction itself. 3 months after humanity's return, the first warning came. It arrived not through the new communication networks, but through something deeper, something that resonated in the bones of every living being in the galaxy. A vibration, a hum, a sense of something vast and terrible moving through the void between galaxies. It's starting, Henderson's voice said, echoing through every communication device, every linked mind, every awakened memory. The Devourer is coming. You have perhaps a year before it reaches the edge of this galaxy. A year, Morix demanded. That's not enough time to. It's more time than we had last time, Henderson interrupted. It's more time than the civilization before us had. It's more time than any species has ever had. His voice softened. Use it wisely. The galaxy mobilized in ways that would have been impossible just months before. Using the technologies humanity had provided and the awakened memories that were surfacing in every species, they began to prepare. Defenses were constructed, not just physical barriers, but something more subtle, more fundamental. Manipulations of the underlying fabric of reality itself, designed to create pockets of space where the Devourer couldn't reach. It won't stop it, a Graxan scientist explained to the assembly, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and wonder. Nothing can stop it, but if we can create enough of these safe zones, if we can protect enough of our knowledge, our culture, our people, maybe we can survive long enough to find a real solution. And if we can't, someone asked. The scientist was quiet for a moment. Then we die, she said finally, but we die fighting together, and maybe that's enough. As the months passed, the sense of approaching doom grew stronger. The Devourer's presence became a constant weight, a shadow at the edge of perception that grew darker with each passing day. And yet, paradoxically, the galaxy had never been more alive. Species that had never interacted before were now working side by side, combining their unique strengths in ways that produced results none of them could have achieved alone. Art and music flourished as civilizations rushed to preserve their cultural heritage. Families grew closer, communities bonded more tightly, and even old enemies found common ground in the face of extinction. "It's strange," Viles confided to Crix one night as they stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. "I've never felt more alive than I do now, knowing that everything could end in a few months." "It's because everything matters now," Crix replied. "Every moment, every choice, every word, it all has weight." He paused, looking out at the lights of the city. "I spent my entire career preparing for this celebration, planning for the day when humanity would be gone and the assembly could finally be stable." He shook his head slowly. "I was such a fool." "We were all fools," Viles agreed, "but we don't have to be fools anymore." 6 months after the first warning, Henderson contacted the assembly again. This time, his image was flickering, unstable, as if the connection was barely holding. "I don't have much time," he said without preamble. "What we're doing, where we've gone, it's taking everything we have to maintain. But I needed to tell you something." "What is it?" Morix asked. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Henderson replied, and for the first time he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Everything's right, better than we could have hoped. The preparations you've made, the unity you've achieved, it's more than we ever managed back when we were in your position." "Then why do you look so tired?" Viles asked softly. "Because holding back the Devourer, even for a little while, requires everything we have, everything we are." His smile faded, replaced by something more complex. "But it's worth it, you're worth it. Whatever happens next, remember that." Henderson, Morix started, but the connection was already failing. "One last thing," Henderson's voice said, barely audible now. "The memories you've been recovering, they're not just information. They're a map, a path to something we built a long time ago, something that might actually be able to stop the Devourer for good." The image flickered violently. "Find it, use it, and when this is over, if there's anything left of us, remember us not as we were at the end, but as we were at the beginning, before we forgot what we could be." The connection died. The search for whatever humanity had hidden became the galaxy's obsession. Using the fragmented memories that were now surfacing in every species, they began to piece together clues, coordinates, mathematical sequences, technological principles that didn't quite make sense but seemed to point toward something enormous. It was the Tessara Elder who finally figured it out. "It's not a place," she said, her ancient voice trembling with excitement and fear. "It's a time. They hid it in time itself." "Time travel is impossible," the Graxan scientist protested. "Not travel, the Zelder corrected. Storage. They created a pocket of time separate from our own and put something there, something important." She closed her eyes, accessing memories that were older than her species. "And they left the key in the one place no one would think to look." "Where?" Morix demanded. "The Devourer itself," the Elder said. "They hid the key inside their enemy." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. To retrieve the key, they would have to make contact with the Devourer, to reach into the heart of the very thing that was coming to destroy them and extract something hidden there. "It's suicide," the military commanders declared. "No ship could get close enough, survive long enough." "Not a ship," Viles said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "A mind. The memories we've been recovering, they're connected to the Devourer somehow. They're fragments of what was lost when it consumed the ancient civilizations." She looked around the room. "If we could amplify those memories, use them to reach into the Devourer itself." "You're talking about a psychic connection to something that consumes reality," Crix said, his voice hollow. "No mind could survive that." "Maybe not alone," Viles admitted. "But together." She looked at the representatives from 100 species, all of whom now shared fragments of the same ancient memories. We're not separate anymore, we're parts of a whole, maybe that's what it takes. The plan that emerged was insane by any rational standard. Representatives from every species would come together, combining their minds, their memories, their very consciousness into a single unified whole. That unified mind would then reach out to the approaching Devourer, using the ancient memories as a bridge to find the key hidden within it. Most of them would die, they knew that going in. The strain of maintaining such a connection, of touching something as vast and terrible as the Devourer, would destroy all but the strongest minds. But the alternative, extinction for everything they had ever known, was worse. I never thought I'd die alongside humans, Crix muttered as they prepared for the ritual, especially after spending so long celebrating their destruction. Humanity isn't there, Viles reminded him, just their memories, just fragments of who they were. She paused, a strange expression crossing her face. Although, in a way, maybe that's what we all are now, fragments trying to become whole again. That's surprisingly philosophical for you, Crix observed. I've been spending too much time with the Tessara Elder, Viles replied. Now quiet, this is going to be difficult. The connection formed slowly, hesitantly, as 100 species learned to merge their consciousness for the first time. There was pain, immense, overwhelming pain, as minds that had been separate for millions of years were forced together. There was confusion, fear, and a moment of absolute terror when they first brushed against the edge of the Devourer's consciousness. But there was something else too, something unexpected. Through the connection, they felt humanity. Not the fragments they had recovered, not the memories they had awakened, but humanity itself, still out there beyond the galaxy, still fighting, still holding back the darkness with everything they had. They're protecting us, someone whispered through the connection. While we do this, they're protecting us. Of course they are, Viles thought back. That's what humans do, that's what they've always done. She paused, feeling the weight of the realization. We were so wrong about them, so terribly, horribly wrong. There will be time for regret later, the Tessara Elder's voice cut through, ancient and strong. Now focus, the key, find the key. They reached deeper, past the pain, past the fear, into the heart of the Devourer itself. And there, buried beneath layers of consumed reality and erased existence, they found it. Not a weapon, not a device, not even knowledge exactly. It was a choice. The ancient civilization, the one that had existed before the Devourer, before humanity, before everything, had faced the same enemy. And they had discovered something terrible. The Devourer wasn't a natural phenomenon. It wasn't a force of nature or a cosmic accident. It was a consequence. A result of choices made by sentient beings accumulated over billions of years. Every act of selfishness, every moment of willful ignorance, every decision to prioritize individual survival over collective good, it all added up. It all fed the darkness. And eventually, the darkness became strong enough to consume everything. But the reverse was also true. Every act of compassion, every moment of understanding, every decision to help others at cost to oneself, it strengthened the light. And the light, if it became strong enough, could push back the darkness. Well, that's it, someone demanded through the connection. That's. Well, the secret, just be better. Not just be better, the Tessara Elder thought back. Become better completely, fundamentally. The Devourer exists because the universe is flawed. To destroy it, we have to fix the flaw. She paused. We have to become something new. The choice hung before them, vast and terrible. To become something new meant leaving behind everything they were, every instinct, every assumption, every piece of identity they had spent their entire existence building. It meant trusting that what emerged on the other side would still be, in some fundamental way, them. It's what humans did, Viles realized suddenly. That's why they're different, that's why they remembered. They already started the transformation millions of years ago. They've been guiding us toward this moment ever since. Not guiding, a voice whispered through the connection, not human, not alien, but something else entirely. Inviting, there's a difference. The voice was warm, compassionate, infinitely patient. We couldn't force you to change. We could only show you the path and hope you would choose to walk it. Who are you? Morix asked, his mind reeling. Who were you before you forgot? The voice replied gently. Who will you be when you remember again? They chose. Not all of them, some pulled back at the last moment, unable or unwilling to sacrifice what they were for what they might become. But enough of them stayed. Enough of them opened themselves to the transformation, allowed the accumulated weight of billions of years of choices to flow through them, accepted the fundamental change that the ancient civilization had first attempted millions of years ago. And in doing so, they became something the universe had never seen before. Not human, not Velthari, not Tessara or Graxon or any of the 100 species that had made up the assembly. Something new, something that contained elements of all of them but was greater than any of them. Something that could look at the Devourer, not with fear, not with hatred, but with compassion. It's just hungry, the new consciousness realized. It's been alone for so long, consuming because that's all it knows how to do, but it doesn't have to be that way. Nothing has to be that way. The Devourer paused. For the first time in billions of years, the darkness that had consumed countless galaxies, erased infinite civilizations, ended trillions of lives, stopped. And listened. The conversation that followed was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the history of existence. Not words, not thoughts, but something deeper, a meeting of fundamental natures, a recognition of shared purpose. The Devourer, it turned out, was not a monster. It was a symptom, a reminder that the universe was not yet complete, that evolution was not just physical but spiritual, that existence itself was a process of becoming rather than being. And the transformed consciousness, the amalgamation of 100 species and the memories of 1,000 more, was the next step in that process. Not the enemy of the Devourer, but its complement. The darkness to their light, the question to their answer, the hunger to their fulfillment. Will it work? Someone asked. The remnants of Viles still holding onto enough of her old identity to feel fear. There's only one way to find out, the new consciousness replied. And reaching out with everything it was, everything it had been, everything it might become, it embraced the Devourer. Not to destroy it, not to contain it, but to integrate it, to accept it as part of existence, part of the ongoing process of becoming that the universe had been engaged in since the first moment of creation. The Devourer resisted. Of course it did. It had been alone for so long that the very concept of connection was terrifying. But the new consciousness was patient. It had memories of patience, fragments of a civilization that had spent millennia preparing for exactly this moment. And slowly, gently, inexorably, it drew the darkness into the light. The transformation, when it came, was not dramatic. There was no explosion, no blinding flash, no cosmic spectacle, just a gradual shift, a sense of something fundamental changing at the deepest level of reality. The Devourer stopped consuming, not because it was destroyed, but because it no longer needed to. The hunger that had driven it for billions of years was finally, completely satisfied. And the galaxy, no, the universe, was different. Not perfect, not complete, but better. Moving in a new direction, toward a new kind of existence that combined the best of what had been with the potential of what might be. In the aftermath, as the transformed consciousness began to separate back into its component parts, they found that they had changed in ways both subtle and profound. They still thought of themselves as Velthari, as Tessara, as Graxon, but those identities had become looser, more fluid, more like chapters in a larger story than separate books entirely. And humanity was there. Not the fragments they had known before, but the real thing, the ancient civilization that had guided them toward this moment, that had sacrificed everything to give them a chance at survival. Welcome back, the humans said, and their voices were warm with something that went beyond mere words. We've been waiting for you. The celebration that followed made the original festivities honoring humanity's death seem pathetic by comparison. But it was a different kind of celebration, not the triumph of one species over another, but the recognition that all species were, ultimately, part of the same journey. We spent so long being afraid of each other, Viles reflected, standing once again on a balcony overlooking the capital city. So long competing, fighting, trying to prove that we were better than everyone else. And now, Crix asked, though he already knew the answer. Now we know better, Viles replied. Now we know that better isn't about comparison. It's about connection, about growth, about becoming something more than we were. She paused, looking out at the stars, stars that seemed brighter now, more vibrant, more alive. Humanity didn't just save us from the Devourer, they saved us from ourselves. That's a lot of credit to give to one species, Crix observed. Is it? Viles turned to look at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. They remembered who they were when we had forgotten who we were. They held back the darkness when we were still celebrating in the light. They believed in us even when we gave them no reason to. She shook her head slowly. If that's not worthy of credit, I don't know what is. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The old boundaries between species dissolved, replaced by something more fluid and dynamic. Travel became easier, communication became deeper, and the accumulated knowledge of billions of years began to surface in ways that accelerated technological and cultural development beyond anything previously imagined. But the most profound changes were the ones that couldn't be measured or quantified. The way a Velthari child might play with a Graxan elder without either of them thinking about the centuries of conflict between their species. The way a Tessara artist might incorporate human concepts into her work, creating something entirely new. The way an assembly meeting might end not with heated argument, but with genuine understanding and compromise. We're still not perfect, Morix admitted during one such meeting several decades after the transformation. We still disagree, we still make mistakes, we still have a long way to go. But we're going there together, Viles replied, and that makes all the difference. The humans, for their part, chose not to rejoin the assembly as a separate species. Instead, they became something else, mentors, guides, friends. They shared their memories, their knowledge, their experiences, but they never imposed their will or claimed superiority. We've had our turn, Henderson explained during one of his rare visits. We had our chance to shape the galaxy and we made a mess of it. That's why we forgot who we were in the first place. We needed to start over to learn how to be part of something larger than ourselves. He paused, looking out at the diverse gathering of beings that had assembled to hear him speak. Now it's your turn, your galaxy, your future. All we ask is that you remember what we taught you and pass it on when the next challenge comes. There will be another challenge, someone asked. There's always another challenge, Henderson replied with a smile. That's the nature of existence, but that's also the beauty of it. You're never done growing, you're never finished becoming. He stood, preparing to leave. We'll be watching, we'll be waiting, and if you need us, truly need us, we'll be there. Where will you go? Viles asked. Back to wherever you were during the transformation. Henderson's smile changed, becoming something more distant, more mysterious. There are other galaxies, he said simply, other species that haven't learned what you've learned, other devourers that need to be embraced rather than fought. He paused at the door. The universe is a big place and it needs all the help it can get. The last transmission from humanity came 700 years after the transformation, when the assembly had grown from 100 species to 10,000. When the galaxy had become a beacon of cooperation and growth that other galaxies were beginning to notice. It was short, simple, and utterly human. You're doing great, keep going. And then, for the second time in galactic history, humanity disappeared. But this time no one celebrated. This time they understood. This time they knew that absence didn't mean ending, that Sometimes the greatest act of love was to step back and let others find their own way. The lights in human space didn't go out this time. They remained on, burning steadily, a reminder of everything that had happened and everything that was still possible. And occasionally, when the galaxy faced a new challenge or reached a new milestone, those lights would flicker, just for a moment, in what could only be interpreted as approval. "We're still not perfect," Viles' descendant said during a memorial ceremony marking the 1,000th anniversary of the transformation. "We still struggle, we still fail, we still have so much to learn." "But we're learning it together," her companion replied, "and that's what matters." In the depths of what had once been human space, the Obsidian Gate pulsed with quiet light, connecting past to future, darkness to light, isolation to unity. It had been built by a civilization that had forgotten itself, used by a species that had remembered, and gifted to a galaxy that had finally learned the most important lesson of all. That the universe is not a competition to be won, but a story to be shared, and that the only way to survive it is together.